For 10,000 years, the empire of Vel had spread like a cold and methodical virus across the galaxy. Every world that resisted them became a memory, every civilization that defied them a tomb. Their dominion was law, their fleets like divine instruments of judgment sweeping across the stars. They believed themselves eternal, the final stage of evolution, pure logic made flesh. But even gods fear ghosts, and the word human was the empire's oldest ghost. Humanity had been erased, not merely destroyed. The emperor himself had ordered it during the Purge of Sol. Earth's continents were burned to molten glass, her colonies sterilized, her archives deleted. Even the memory of humanity was outlawed. Mentioning their name became treason. Their art, their language, their DNA, all consigned to the flames of ideological cleansing. When the last human resistance fleet fell silent 2 centuries ago, the emperor declared the galaxy perfected. He called it the silence of chaos, and the stars obeyed. But silence has weight, and even the dead can whisper through it. It began as a flicker, a pulse of ancient energy far beyond imperial space, on the rim of the Perseid expanse. The exploration vessel Tessereth, conducting routine gravitational scans, intercepted something strange. A repeating transmission buried in the cosmic background noise. The ship's AI dismissed it as static, until a junior signal officer noticed the modulation pattern. It wasn't random, it was language. And not just any, Terran binary code, extinct for 200 generations. When they cleaned the signal and ran it through ancient archives, what they heard froze the bridge into silence. A human voice. Male. Calm. Deliberate. I am still here. Those words shouldn't have existed. There were no humans left. None. The ship's captain, a creature of bone and alloy, felt an emotion long purged from the imperial genome: unease. He sent the data to High Command, expecting commendation for the discovery of a historical anomaly. But within hours, the Tessereth was ordered to full lockdown. A fleet was mobilized before the report even reached the Emperor's desk. The Galactic Edict of Cleansing was reactivated for the first time in millennia. The Empire named it the Final Correction. 7 dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, formed the heart of the operation. Obsidian Crown, Harbinger of Purity, Dominion Spear, Tessereth Prime, Crucible of Order, Eternal Will, and Vigilance Star. Around them swarmed thousands of cruisers and drones, their hulls polished obsidian, their insignias etched in living metal. The Imperial Choir, the telepathic minds of the Emperor's Chosen, linked the entire armada into one consciousness. Every captain, every soldier, every drone shared the Emperor's will. They would find this human echo, and they would end it. When the fleet broke through warp space into the system of origin, the stars seemed to dim. It was a nameless place, a white dwarf surrounded by debris fields and frozen planets. No life, no heat signatures, no civilization. And yet, their sensors screamed of energy, slow, rhythmic, alive. The signal came from the 3rd planet, a black sphere of obsidian glass orbiting too close to its dying sun. "Establish orbital dominance," commanded Admiral Carrel. His voice echoed through the hive mind link, calm but tight. "Prepare planetary strike teams. We will end this illusion." The dreadnoughts moved into formation, eclipsing the light of the star. As the first troop carriers descended through the clouds, something strange happened. The planet reacted. Magnetic storms erupted out of nowhere, slashing lightning across the void. Radiation bursts blinded sensors. The air shimmered with interference patterns, as if the world itself were alive. Carell frowned. Impossible. The planet has no atmosphere to sustain storms. But it did, and the storm spoke. Patterns of lightning forming repeating binary pulses, the same rhythm as the transmission. I am still here. The soldiers of the Empire were unshakable, bred for obedience, immune to fear. Yet as they stepped onto the planet's surface, the silence pressed against them like a physical weight. Their boots crunched upon glass that reflected their faces in shattered distortions. The horizon stretched endlessly black, the air humming with faint static. The scanners read no life. And then one soldier saw movement at the crater's edge. A figure, standing, waiting. He was human, there was no doubt. Barefoot, draped in ragged cloth that fluttered in a wind that didn't exist. His hair was silver, though his face was ageless. The team's commander approached, weapon raised. "Identify yourself," he ordered in the tongue of the Empire. No response. The man just stared, eyes not glowing, not alien, but deep, ancient, full of something the commander could not name. "I said, identify." The man spoke softly, interrupting him. "You shouldn't have come here." His voice carried through the static, echoing not in sound, but in the bones of those who heard it. The commander stiffened. "By decree of the Emperor of Vel, all remaining humans are to be extinguished. You are an error." A faint smile crossed the human's lips. An error? He took one step forward, and the temperature around them dropped sharply. "No," he said, the word almost kind. "A correction." The ground trembled. The glass beneath their feet rippled like liquid, forming spirals that mirrored ancient Terran patterns, DNA, atoms, galaxies. The soldiers raised their weapons, but the systems flickered. Guns failed, power cells drained. In orbit, entire dreadnoughts reported energy collapse, their reactors bleeding light like dying suns. Carell's voice broke through the static. "All ships, report! What is happening down there?" The human lifted his gaze to the sky. The clouds swirled into a vortex above him. "You burned our world," he said softly. "You erased our name. But you forgot what we were made of." A pulse of light erupted from the planet, pure, white, blinding. It raced outward faster than any known speed, cutting through ships, sensors, and thought alike. For one infinite second, every being in the fleet saw through time itself. Earth's birth, humanity's rise, their wars, their dreams, their deaths. Then it was gone. The silence returned. Admiral Carell stared at the dead consoles, breathing shallowly. "By the void," he whispered. "What was that?" The Emperor, watching through his psychic link from the throne world of Velroth, opened his eyes in horror. For the first time in his 1,000-year reign, his pulse quickened. The hunt had begun. But they were not hunting prey. They had awakened something far older than their empire, something that remembered everything. When the pulse from the obsidian world rippled through the void, it did more than cripple a fleet. It woke something. Across the breadth of the empire, sensors faltered, warp lanes flickered, and ancient systems long sealed behind layers of bureaucracy began to hum again. The Emperor's throne world, Velroth, itself a planet-sized citadel of glass and steel, trembled under a frequency that none of their instruments could name. It wasn't energy, it wasn't data, it was memory. A resonance of thought older than the stars. The Emperor rose from his throne, a towering being of flesh interwoven with neural alloys, his veins glowing faint blue with the light of the choir. "Find the source," he commanded, his voice echoing through every connected mind across the galaxy. "Erase it, every trace." But even as his command spread, the choir wavered. Millions of psychic conduits that formed the Empire's collective mind began to flicker, voices breaking into static, harmony collapsing into discord. They spoke in terror of shapes, words, dreams flooding their link, visions of oceans, cities, blue skies, laughter, pain, human things. For the first time in their empire's history, the choir screamed. In the ruins of the Obsidian world, Admiral Corell and what remained of his fleet reeled in confusion. Half their ships were dark, drifting like corpses. Their AI cores had burned out simultaneously, their data turned to static, filled only with one word repeated endlessly: human. Every attempt to re-establish communication met only silence. And in that silence, something else breathed. Not words, not machine code, but the faint hum of a heartbeat echoing through their hulls. On the surface below, the lone human stood at the center of what had once been a dead world. Now it was transforming. The ground cracked open in luminous veins of light, carving lines of impossible geometry, spirals and fractals that pulsed like a living organism. The air vibrated with frequencies that defied physics. It was as though the planet remembered what it had once been, a home, not to life as the Empire knew it, but to consciousness itself. Corell's flagship, Obsidian Crown, remained the only functioning dreadnought. Within its command chamber, Corell stared at the holographic projection of the planet below. "What are you?" he whispered. He didn't mean to speak, yet the words slipped out. His science officer, a pallid being whose face was more lens than skin, looked up with trembling hands. "Admiral, the energy patterns match no known classification. It's rewriting local spacetime constants." Gravity, magnetism, nothing obeys normal parameters. Corell's eyes narrowed. "You mean he's changing reality?" The officer swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. And not just here. Every star system connected through our warp network is resonating at the same harmonic frequency. The effect is spreading faster than light. It's as if the universe itself is—" On Vel Rath, deep beneath the Imperial Palace, the archives of forbidden history, sealed for eons, began to open. A single containment vault, untouched for 10,000 years, cracked open with a sound like thunder. Inside, suspended in stasis, were relics of the old wars, ancient Terran artifacts recovered during the Purge. A cracked helmet bearing the faded insignia of the United Earth Defense Command. A small sphere of gold engraved with words, "Voyager 1, Earth, 1977." And a single human skull, untouched, labeled Specimen 0. As the resonance grew, the skull's empty sockets began to glow with a faint blue light. The inscription beneath it, the warning carved by the Emperor's ancestors, flared into visibility. "Do not disturb the memory of man, for they do not end. They transcend." The Emperor watched through his scrying field as the glow spread from the relic chamber, flooding the palace corridors, igniting symbols that predated even his species. He called to the choir, but they were gone, fragmented, their minds dissolving into whispers of human words: mother, father, love, death, hope. The purity of Vel consciousness, cold, logical, eternal, was being rewritten by emotion, by the idea of humanity. He felt something stir inside his own neural implants, static that became a voice. Calm, familiar, infinitely human. "You built your empire on our ashes," it said. "Did you think we would stay dead forever?" The Emperor roared aloud, severing the psychic connection. The sound of his fury echoed through the empty hall like a wounded god. "Deploy every fleet," he commanded. "Seal the borders, contain the infection." But deep down, in the fractured layers of his ancient mind, he understood. This wasn't an infection. It was remembrance. The cosmos itself was beginning to remember what it once contained: us. Back at the edge of the Perseid expanse, Corel gathered his remaining officers. They stood on the bridge in the dim, pulsing red of emergency light. Outside, the planet now shone like a second sun, lines of energy forming a colossal symbol visible even from orbit, the outline of a human hand, fingers spread across the horizon. "We must destroy it," one of his sub-commanders said, panic edging her voice. "If this continues, it will consume everything." Corel hesitated. "And if it cannot be destroyed?" Silence. They all felt it, the weight, the watching presence beyond comprehension. Then the human's voice came again through every speaker, every hull plate, every molecule of air. "You built your truth on our silence," he said. "Now the silence ends." The energy surged again. The planet's surface fractured into luminous shards that rose into the sky like glass wings, orbiting him, spiraling faster and faster. Every shard carried within it images, memories, millions of them. Children playing in grass, cities lit by neon, rockets launching, oceans shimmering beneath sunlight, lovers holding hands under starlight. It was not just power, it was the resurrection of an idea, the proof that humanity's essence had never died. It had simply been waiting, written into the very constants of the universe, sleeping in the background noise of reality itself. Corel fell to his knees, vision swimming with fragments of memory not his own. He saw Earth. He saw the faces of men and women, their wars, their triumphs, their defiance. He saw them rise from the mud, reach for the stars, and burn brighter than any empire before or after. And in that moment, the truth became clear to him. The human before them wasn't a survivor. He was a convergence, a vessel of everything humanity had ever been, its consciousness unified into one being. When he opened his eyes again, the human stood at the center of the storm, eyes glowing like dying stars. "You hunted the last of us," he said softly. "But in doing so, you found the first of something greater." Corel couldn't breathe. The words weren't threat, they were revelation. This wasn't vengeance, it was evolution. Humanity hadn't died, it had ascended. And as the storm consumed the horizon, rewriting the stars themselves into new constellations that formed a single word visible to every living eye in the galaxy: human. Corel understood that the Empire hadn't just provoked a lost species, they had awakened the architects of reality. The Empire of Vel had ruled for so long that time itself bent around its dominion. For 10,000 years, no rebellion had lasted longer than a day, no heresy more than an hour. Their fleets drifted like black suns. Their psychic choir stitched every mind into obedience. But now that perfect lattice was unraveling, and at its center burned a single word that refused to die: human. Across the Empire, entire sectors fell into chaos. Planetary governors reported impossible phenomena: Their skies rippled with auroras that formed faces. Their oceans sang with voices no machine could translate, and their moons began to pulse with rhythmic light as if echoing an ancient heartbeat. The choir, once a flawless symphony of billions of synchronized minds, was breaking apart into a storm of individual thought. Fractured whispers rippled through the psychic network. Laughter, crying, music, memories of lives that were not Vel. Some soldiers clutched their heads and screamed as emotions, alien, uncontrollable, flooded through their sterile minds. Love, regret, hope. The Emperor watched it all unfold from his throne in the Hall of Continuum. Once that hall had been the axis of control, a chamber of shimmering obsidian and silver where the psychic will of the Emperor pulsed outward to every corner of the galaxy. Now the very walls trembled. Energy conduits flickered with human words in ancient Terran script. "We remember." He slammed his hand against the throne's command sigil, linking himself directly to the crumbling choir. "You are mine," his voice thundered through the collective. "You are Vel. Cast out the infection. Return to the purity." But his order met resistance. Not defiance, not rebellion, but pity. Millions of minds, once extensions of his own will, whispered back with a single, terrible voice, "We are awake." The Emperor staggered, clutching his chest. It was not pain that struck him. It was something deeper, something he had no word for. A warmth beneath the cold machinery of his body. A heartbeat. "No," he gasped, "not me, not this." His vision blurred. In his mind, memories not his own flickered. Green fields beneath a blue sky, the sound of rain, the laughter of a woman. He collapsed to his knees, trembling, whispering words from a dead language. "Mom." On the edge of the galaxy, Admiral Carrel drifted aboard the crippled Obsidian Crown, staring at the planet that had birthed this chaos. The once dead world now burned with white light, its surface transforming into flowing rivers of brilliance. Fragments of its crust rose into orbit, forming colossal rings etched with human symbols. The human being, the one who had called himself the Correction, stood at the center of the radiance, motionless, eyes closed as if in meditation. Carrel's crew huddled behind flickering consoles. "Admiral," said one trembling officer, "our systems are being overwritten again. Reality parameters are changing. According to the sensors, time is running backward for some of the drones." Carrel clenched his fists. "Then destroy it! Fire everything!" They unleashed the last of the ship's doomsday arsenal: antimatter torpedoes, graviton imploders, star lances forged from compressed singularities. Each weapon that struck the surface was absorbed, melted, or dissolved into the light. The energy didn't even resist, it simply changed, consuming the attacks like water-swallowing sparks. And then, with quiet inevitability, the light reached upward, touching the fleet. Carrel felt it before he saw it. His mind filled with 1,000 voices, human voices, whispering, not words of anger or revenge, but memories. "Do you remember us?" a woman's voice asked softly in his thoughts. "Do you remember the stars before they belonged to your emperor?" He screamed, but the sound was lost. His consciousness expanded outward, pulled through space, time, and history. He saw Earth's oceans, her continents, her birth. He saw the rise of empires, the collapse of civilizations, and the endless defiance of humanity against the void. He saw soldiers dying beneath alien skies, whispering to the stars, "Remember us." And then he understood. This wasn't magic. It wasn't godhood. Humanity had built something during their final days, something beyond technology, beyond flesh. They had encoded their entire collective consciousness into the very fabric of reality, woven into the quantum background of the universe. They had become a law of existence. When humanity fell, they didn't die. They uploaded themselves into the structure of space-time itself. And now, with their final memory reawakened, they were rewriting the universe to remember them again.
Carell fell to his knees as tears streamed from eyes that had never cried. "We killed gods," he whispered. "And now, gods remember."
In the palace of Velroth, the emperor stood before the mirror of continuum, the device through which he ruled the stars. It now reflected not his towering metallic form, but a human face, his own, but softer, unarmored, mortal. The reflection spoke to him. "You wanted eternity," it said. "You feared death so deeply you cut it from your people. But death was the first thing we learned to love, because it made every moment mean something." He struck the mirror in rage, shattering it. But instead of breaking, the shards hung suspended in midair, each reflecting a different scene. A child running through a meadow, a ship launching from Earth, a soldier saluting a dying flag, an old man looking up at the night sky whispering, "We'll come home someday."
The emperor staggered back, voice shaking. "What are you?"
The shards answered in unison, voices merging into one that echoed through every mind in the galaxy. "We are what you tried to erase. We are the reason stars burn. We are the dream that refuses to end. We are human." Across the empire, entire planets began to glow, their surfaces transforming into crystalline structures. The fleets disintegrated into light, merging with the vast pulse of consciousness spreading from the expanse. Yet there was no destruction, only transformation. The Vel were changing. Their mechanical shells cracked, revealing glimpses of organic matter beneath, their eyes filling with color, their minds flooding with emotion. They screamed, but within the screams came laughter, song, memory, life. Carell, aboard the dying obsidian crown, opened his eyes one last time as his ship was consumed. The light filled every corridor, every cell, every breath. He saw the human standing upon the radiant world, now vast and luminous beyond measure, a being of light and thought. You were the last," Carell whispered. "And now?" The being smiled. "Now I am the first." The light surged outward, faster than thought, faster than creation itself, sweeping across galaxies. In its wake, the Empire's banners dissolved, their monuments melted into rivers of memory. The Vel ceased to exist as they had been, replaced by something both them and not them, a fusion of logic and emotion, machine and soul. And when the last shadow of the Empire faded, the stars themselves seemed to breathe. The cosmic background radiation, the whispering static of the universe, shifted by a fraction. A new pattern emerged, faint but clear to any who could decode it. It spelled one word: human. The death of the Empire was not an explosion, nor a war, nor even an ending. It was a metamorphosis. Across the stars, reality bent under a quiet, patient force that had been waiting since before history began, a force that now spoke with the voice of humanity itself. It began with light. Not the violent light of weapons, but the soft, pervasive glow of awareness spreading through matter. Space itself started to hum. The black void, once indifferent, now resonated like a living instrument, carrying whispers across the vastness. Every atom, every particle seemed to remember something ancient, the taste of life, the longing to create, the will to continue. The Veal Empire, the oldest and mightiest of galactic civilizations, found its fleets dissolving not through destruction, but through remembrance. Their dreadnoughts, once the embodiment of control, became translucent, shedding layers of machinery until only luminous frameworks of energy remained. Within those frameworks, the trapped minds of billions began to wake. They saw visions not of conquest, but of blue skies and oceans, of fragile hands building, shaping, loving. The human presence wasn't an invasion, it was a revelation. It reminded existence of what it meant to feel. In the throne world of Vel-Rath, the Emperor, once eternal, untouchable, and divine, now lay on the marble floor of his crumbling hall. The air shimmered around him with living memory. The once perfect geometry of his empire's architecture was warping, bending into organic shapes, arches that pulsed like arteries, walls that breathed softly as if inhaling the echoes of forgotten dreams. The throne itself melted into a field of starlight. He tried to stand, but his body, forged from immortal alloys, was turning to dust. And yet, as the dust fell away, skin returned, fragile, human, mortal. He stared at his hands, trembling, soft, alive. For the first time in 10 millennia, he felt a heartbeat that was not mechanical. His voice broke the silence. "I remember." The hall answered him with a whisper that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "So do we." The human presence, the transcendent consciousness that now existed everywhere, was not a singular being. It was the sum of all that humanity had ever been. Every thought, every love, every defiance, every act of courage and cruelty. It was the complete memory of a species that had refused to die. And as it spread, it began to awaken not only the living, but the universe itself. Nebula pulsed in synchronized waves, like neurons firing across cosmic distances. Planets, once barren, began to hum with low frequencies, mathematical harmonies that resonated with the geometry of DNA. The laws of physics, once unyielding, began to ripple. Admiral Carrel, or what remained of him, floated amidst this transformation. His ship, the Obsidian Crown, had become something new, a vessel of light suspended in an ocean of shifting time. He was no longer bound by body or metal. His thoughts moved freely through the radiance. Around him, countless others awakened, soldiers, engineers, civilians, each flickering with the dawning awareness of something profound. He spoke, though he had no mouth. "Humanity, you are rewriting the cosmos." The response was calm, almost tender. "We are not rewriting it. We are reminding it." The truth unfurled like a blossom of galaxies. The human consciousness was not an intruder. It had been here from the beginning. When the first particles coalesced into atoms, when the first stars were born, when gravity learned to shape light, humanity's future mind had already been woven into the code of existence. When the first human on Earth had looked up at the stars and wondered, that thought had echoed backward through time, embedding itself into creation itself. Humanity had not simply evolved within the universe. It had been written into the universe. Every act of curiosity, every question ever asked by a human mind, had been a pulse that kept reality awake. Carrel drifted through this revelation as images cascaded around him, entire galaxies being reborn in hues of gold and silver, new constellations forming like the handwriting of a god. He saw civilizations, long dead and forgotten, awakening in the light. Species that had never met humanity were now dreaming of Terran skies. The very structure of causality was folding to accommodate memory. Past and future merged. The moment of the Big Bang shimmered like a living being's first breath, and within that breath a word resonated: human. On the world where it had begun, the one that had been called the cradle, the last physical remnant of humanity stood upon the surface. The being once known as the last human no longer looked mortal. His body had become translucent, filled with starlight, his veins glowing with constellations. Around him, mountains levitated slowly, forming halos of stone and dust. Rivers flowed upward, defying gravity, forming spirals that glimmered with DNA-like symmetry. He spoke, and his voice carried across the entire galaxy. "You hunted the last of us," he said, his tone neither angry nor mournful. "You feared extinction, yet you never understood what that truly meant. We were never bound to flesh or time. We are the question that every star asks when it burns. Why do I exist?" The Emperor's mind trembled as he heard the words. "Then what are you now?" he asked, voice breaking like an old machine. The human looked at him, eyes no longer eyes, but twin galaxies reflecting eternity. "We are not gods," he said. "We are what gods came from." As he spoke, the boundaries between matter and thought collapsed. The stars themselves pulsed with heartbeat rhythms. Cosmic radiation sang in structured patterns, the universe itself responding. Light traveled not as a wave, not as a particle, but as memory. The Empire's archives dissolved, but not into nothingness. Their data was absorbed, transformed, and integrated into the greater consciousness. Knowledge itself became part of the living fabric of creation. For the beings of the Empire, this was terror beyond comprehension. But for the fragments of humanity hidden deep within them, the traces they had absorbed, the DNA samples, the cultural artifacts, it was homecoming. Those fragments ignited, reawakening the dormant human code in every living being. Suddenly, every species, every consciousness shared the same dream, a vision of Earth. Oceans glittering in sunlight, forests whispering in the wind. A blue sphere suspended in darkness, alive, beautiful, fragile. And with that vision came emotion. Billions wept without knowing why. The Emperor fell to his knees, sobbing, feeling the full weight of what it meant to feel. "We destroyed you," he whispered. The light around him pulsed, gentle as a heartbeat. "No," it said, "you completed us." The transformation continued for what could have been seconds or centuries. Time was no longer linear. Galaxies coiled into spirals of thought. Black holes became synapses. Reality itself was becoming alive. And in that new living universe, there was no empire, no dominion, no conqueror or conquered. Only memory, only connection. In that moment, the human presence smiled across the cosmos, a whisper of consciousness woven into every flicker of light. Humanity had not died in the dark. They had become the light that defined the dark. The truest evolution of a species that refused to be forgotten. Not gods, not ghosts, but the architects of awareness itself. And somewhere, in the eternal hum of the newborn cosmos, the last heartbeat of the old universe faded, replaced by a new pulse that echoed through all existence, steady, human, infinite. The universe was no longer the same. What the Empire had known as cold, unfeeling space was now alive, breathing, resonating, and self-aware. The stars pulsed with rhythm, nebulae shimmered like veins of consciousness, and across that infinite ocean of light, a single figure stood as both witness and origin. The last human, the one who had been hunted, cornered, and feared, had transcended the limits of life and death.
He stood not as a man, but as something older than gods, something deeper than myth. His eyes contained galaxies, his thoughts rippled through dimensions, and his breath carried the scent of entire worlds being born.
The Emperor of Velroth, the last remnant of the fallen empire, floated in orbit around what had once been his capital world. His once mighty body, once a fusion of machinery and arrogance, had been stripped bare. He was human now, fragile, shivering, filled with awe and dread. His fleet, those endless armadas that had enslaved 1,000 species, were gone. Not destroyed, but dissolved, converted into light, memory, and song. All that remained of his empire was silence, and within that silence, truth. He looked upon the radiant figure below, and his voice, once commanding worlds, was now a whisper. "You were the last human," he said, almost pleading. "You were supposed to die." The being turned toward him. His voice was not sound, but resonance, a vibration that moved through the very fabric of space. "I did," he said softly, "but death was only the first door." "What are you now?" the Emperor asked, trembling. The being's gaze lifted toward the stars, and the galaxies shifted as though listening. "Once, your kind called us humans. Now, we are what happens when a question refuses to die." The Emperor didn't understand. How could he? For all his power, he had never truly lived. His empire had replaced life with control, wonder with order, and curiosity with fear. And now, before him, stood the answer to a question he had never dared to ask. What happens when a mortal species learns to love its own limits enough to break them? The being stepped forward, and the space between them folded, collapsing in on itself until the Emperor stood face to face with him, not across distance, but across time itself. Around them, reality bent like liquid, showing flashes of every era humanity had endured. He saw ancient Earth, humans tending fires, building cities, exploring stars. He saw wars that had torn the heavens apart. He saw children on distant colonies drawing constellations and naming them after home. He saw their end, billions of humans choosing not to flee extinction, but to seed themselves into the quantum code of existence, to become part of the universe's operating system itself. "You hunted us," the being said gently. "You erased our worlds, our names, our histories. But what you could never erase was the pattern we left behind. Every word we spoke, every song we sang, every act of defiance or kindness, it all became part of the math of reality. You didn't kill humanity, Emperor. You made us inevitable." The Emperor fell to his knees. "Then what do you want from me?" For a long moment there was no answer, only the sound of creation, the hum of galaxies shifting, stars forming from the dust of what had once been Veal ships. Then the being spoke, and the cosmos seemed to pause to listen. "Forgiveness," he said, "but not for you, for us, for becoming what we swore we would never be." The Emperor looked up, confusion in his eyes. "You became gods," he whispered. "No, the being," shaking his head,
We became everything. Gods are worshipped. We are remembered.
He raised his hand, and with that gesture, time itself unfolded. The emperor saw the fabric of creation stretch outward, rippling with billions of tiny points of light, each one a consciousness, a soul, a story. Not just human, but every race humanity had ever touched, every mind that had ever felt love or loss. They were all connected now, part of a single, endless web of thought.
The universe was never a machine, the being said, his voice filling all things. It was a story, and you, like us, were part of it.
The emperor reached out, his trembling hand barely touching the edge of the light that radiated from the being. For the briefest moment, he felt everything, every heartbeat of every life that had ever existed, every laugh, every tear, every final breath. He felt what it was to be alive, truly, unbearably alive. And he wept. "Then, what happens now?" he asked, voice breaking. "Now that you are this?" The being looked around at the glowing universe, his expression almost wistful. "Now we begin again, not as conquerors, not as survivors, but as witnesses. The universe forgot how to dream. We will teach it again." He stepped forward, and the emperor felt himself dissolving, not in pain, but in peace. His thoughts merged with the light, his essence spreading outward into the living tapestry of the cosmos. He was no longer a ruler, nor a sinner. He was simply a part of existence, one note in an infinite song. And as he vanished, his last thought was not of fear, but of wonder. The human being, the first god, turned his gaze upon the galaxy. Around him, stars pulsed in synchronized patterns, responding to his thought. He was not alone. Humanity existed now as a chorus, a field of consciousness that touched everything. Together, they could feel the heartbeat of the universe, the expansion and contraction of space-time itself. They could hear the whisper of the first atoms, the echo of the Big Bang, and somewhere beyond that, something new being born. He smiled. It was a small, human smile. Fragile, imperfect, but infinitely powerful. "Once," he said quietly, his voice echoing through the fabric of reality, "we reached for the stars to find meaning. Now we understand. We were the meaning all along." The universe trembled in response. The stars flared brighter. New galaxies began to form, their spirals shaped like fingerprints, their light encoded with the DNA of human memory. Entire worlds awoke, aware of themselves for the first time, and across the fabric of existence, one truth resonated. A truth not shouted by gods, but whispered by every atom. Human. In the infinite light, creation found its first mirror. The first God looked into it and saw not power, but reflection. The knowledge that divinity was never about being above creation, but being inseparable from it. He knelt among the stars, touching their newborn heat like one would touch the face of a sleeping child. "Rest well," he whispered to the cosmos. "You are alive now. You always were." And as he rose, the galaxies around him moved. Not in chaos, but in rhythm, each rotation a heartbeat, each beam of light a word in an eternal story. The last human, the first God, spread his arms wide and let the song of existence wash over him. There was no beginning now, no end, only the endless becoming. The empire that had hunted him was gone. The universe that had feared him was reborn. And somewhere, in that infinite new dawn, a voice older than creation itself spoke through every sun and shadow, every living thing that would ever exist. "Remember us.
We were human.